Hi, and welcome to this video about the principles of training for strength and muscle. I'm Tina McInnes, the creator of Women Who Want Muscle, and I really believe that educating women all about the how, what, and why of training for muscle and strength will get them better results for the time they spend in the gym. So first, I want to distinguish between exercise and training. I'm going to highlight the difference using an analogy. Imagine getting into a car and going out for a Sunday drive. It might be enjoyable, it expends energy, but ultimately you end up back at home. That's like exercise. On the other hand, if you were to get into a car with a set of directions in order to get to a destination, that's more like training. So in effect, all of training is some form of exercise, but not all exercise is a form of training. In order to get results, whether they be performance in a sport, if you're an athlete, or in this case, developing some more strength and muscle, you have to follow a training plan to get there. So now you all have a training plan, it's the program. And the issue is, in order to get to where you want to go, growing muscle and strength, well, you need to be able to drive and follow the directions. And that's where the education piece really comes in. The more you know about what you're doing, it's really going to make the difference in you getting the results you want. Let's talk a little bit about muscle and strength. They're obviously interrelated properties, but they're actually separate physical attributes to some extent. Strength is a neuromuscular attribute or quality. It's the ability of the brain and peripheral nerves to recruit sufficient muscle fibers with sufficient force, speed, and coordination to get a specific strength feat accomplished. Think of the times when you may have miscalculated, like, for example, grabbing hold of a carton of milk that you thought was full but was in fact empty, and the milk went flying. That's because your brain has an idea of the amount of force that it needs to mount to get a specific task accomplished based on learning. Now, it cannot sort of recruit what isn't there. So obviously, to be strong, you need a certain amount of muscle, obviously. Muscles, by contrast, are simple tissues. They contract and relax in response to these signals. And if they get enough signal to contract and respond, then they grow in size. Now, to highlight this further, I want to bring in another analogy of rowers in a boat. By virtue of age, we lose rowers in our boat, meaning we lose muscle fibers size. And we therefore, in this analogy, cannot row as quickly, okay? So if you have a boat that has only 2 rowers in it and each rower can pull with only so much force, clearly you're not going to be as fast as a boat that has greater numbers of rowers in it, okay? So if we add rowers to the boat, that would be like growing muscle fibers. And then we need to teach those rowers to row in synchrony. That's effectively a strength quality, the ability to then utilize those rowers to move the boat more quickly. So we grow muscles in order to develop a certain amount of strength, but strength itself also needs to be taught by increasing the exposure to increasing loads, okay? So that brings me to how we train these attributes in the gym. Strength for beginners typically changes the most rapidly because you can see improvements in a couple of weeks of starting training. And this is it's a learning phenomenon. It's the brain understanding a little bit better how to connect with certain muscles. So people will report within a few weeks of training a better mind-muscle connection, a greater capacity to move with with a certain degree of proficiency in the movements, and they can reach for heavier weights. Okay, so really this ability to get stronger does require us to challenge greater load over time and reach for heavier weights. On the other hand, muscles take a lot longer to grow. You have to repeatedly stimulate them in a sufficient volume of training, meaning the number of sessions each week, and in each session, the number of sets and reps that you accomplish will then challenge the muscle sufficiently to need to grow in size. And those changes tend to take months. So for women in the program, I'd say the soonest they may start to notice changes is 6 months, but typically more at 1 year. And it really is quite individual. Certainly the degree to which a visible change occurs, like changes in the shape of your limbs from training, really depends on the individual, how much training they've done in the period of time that they've been using the program. But not only that, the amount of body fat because body fat then determines the definition around those muscles. But if you were to do a body composition analysis, you would definitely see changes in the lean mass for most people using a good quality program. And your program in the Women Who Want Muscle is designed to build both muscle and strength. So to build strength, we use a principle called progressive overload. This is progressively working at the leading edge of your current capacity. Without doing that, the body has no reason to learn how to recruit the existing muscles with greater efficiency and force. Okay, so that's an important principle. The other thing is sufficient volume. So if you don't repeatedly contract the muscles enough, they have no reason to grow in size. But just like rowers in the boat, if you really ask the body to repeatedly do the work, then it's going to become more efficient if you can increase the rowers in the boat. So we add muscle based on doing a sufficient volume of work, the total number of sets and reps for every muscle group across the week. So muscles need specific stimuli to grow, and these include metabolic stress, mechanical tension, and micro damage. I won't go into the details further in this particular talk. Suffice it to say, you need to stress a muscle to make it grow. Now, a lot of times people will shy away from this idea of growing muscle, and they have certain concerns about lifting heavy weights. I want to reassure you that the work that we're doing isn't either bodybuilding type of programming, nor is it powerlifting. In the case of, and you can appreciate the differences in training between these two types of athletes, okay? In the one case, a bodybuilder will use sometimes lower weights, but with very high volumes. So exhausting the muscle 4 to 5 times, maybe even 6 times a week, stressing that muscle repeatedly with many, many repetitions to the point of muscle exhaustion. And training in that way, with that amount of volume over often months to years, is what's required for that type of result. Meanwhile, to become a power lifter who can maximally back squat or bench press or deadlift a significant amount of weight, is training specifically with heavy weights and not a lot of repetitions, because that would be too exhausting. So you can appreciate further the differences in how we train these attributes. And the programming in the Women Who Want Muscle program is neither of those things. So a lot of times I do get concern from clients coming in that they don't want to get too bulky like a bodybuilder, and they don't want to be exposed to crazy, heavy lifts using barbells. And while there is an ability to progress in the programs within this training plan, using barbells as an option, it's not generally in the mainstream program. So there's an opportunity to develop strength and muscle that doesn't look like these kinds of training plans, okay? What we're trying to do is develop functional strength for health and better aging in this program. So we don't need to train to that extent to get stronger. What we do want to concern ourselves with, and this is the last teaching point I'll make, is to preserve fast twitch muscle fibers. Our muscles tend to have 2 types of muscle fibers. Some muscles have a greater percentage of one type versus the other, but type 1 fibers are what are utilized in continuous efforts of long duration. They contract repeatedly they're more fatigue resistant. They don't exert as much force, so they're the types of fibers you would use for endurance sports. And so sometimes people will ask me, well, isn't doing my endurance sports good enough to maintain strength as I age? The reality is that as we get older, we preferentially use the other type of muscle fibers, the type 2 muscle fibers that exert high degrees of force and they get more tired more quickly, but they are also able to do a high amount of work very fast. So there are power fibers, and they allow us to do things like sprinting, weightlifting, and doing things as we get older. You might say, well, I currently have the capacity to do as many things as I need to. things like lifting my luggage or climbing a steep hill or, lifting my grandchild. The reality is that being able to do these things down the road really demands that we are much stronger than that now, because there's an age-related decline in strength, even with training. We mitigate that, but we want to prepare ourselves to age well. And even the ability to prevent ourselves falling if we trip relies on these very fast twitch reactive fibers. So you can appreciate that training in order to age well, to maintain good health, really begins with training both muscle and strength. And your program is designed with these principles in mind. But I would remind you that the best training plan is only as good as it is well used. And that's where your efforts come in, but also your knowledge. So the more you can absorb and learn about the process of training, the better off you will be. Thanks for listening.